It does not begin with pyramids or lost cities. It begins with something small. An object resting beneath museum glass, lit by a gentle amber glow that seems almost apologetic, as if the light itself is unsure whether it should reveal what lies beneath it. At first glance, it appears ordinary, a lump of darkened metal, fractured and worn by time. Its surface is rough, textured by centuries of silence. Visitors pass it without much thought, yet the longer one looks, the stranger it becomes. Beneath the corrosion, there are lines, not scratches, not damage, deliberate lines, curved teeth, circular symmetry, patterns that repeat with quiet precision, shapes that suggest motion. Even though the object has not moved in 2,000 years, no plaque introduces it with drama. The description is measured, careful. Discovered during an excavation, recovered from deep soil layers, dated through standard methods, catalogued, archived. And yet, when it was first uncovered, the reaction was not calm. The excavation site lay far from any modern road, where the ground had remained undisturbed for centuries. Workers brushed soil away in patient strokes. Stone fragments emerged, pottery shards, the expected debris of a forgotten settlement. Then metal caught the sunlight, a solid mass, fused by age unremarkable until cleaned. It was during restoration that everything changed. As conservators removed hardened sediment, thin circular forms appeared inside the block, interlocking shapes, teeth aligned with impossible consistency. The object was not decorative. It was mechanical. Scholars leaned closer. Measurements were taken. The gears were counted. Their spacing was exact. Their proportions mathematically consistent. This was not an ornament. It was a device built to calculate or predict. That alone would have been remarkable. But when laboratory tests returned, the room grew quiet. The object had been buried in layers securely dated to a period, long before such mechanical engineering was believed to exist. Centuries before complex gear systems were supposed to appear. There were no earlier versions. No crude prototypes. No evolutionary steps leading up to it. It arrived in history, fully formed. The official response was cautious. Perhaps it was an anomaly. Perhaps the timeline of invention required minor adjustment. Academic papers were written in restrained language. Words like unexpected and intriguing appeared frequently, but late at night, when the museum closes and the room grows still, the question lingers more boldly than the labels allow. If someone could build this, what else could they build? There are no blueprints, no surviving manuals, no workshop filled with discarded attempts. The culture that produced it left behind temples, coins, and inscriptions. Yet for this device, there is silence. It is as if the knowledge required to create it existed briefly, and then withdrew. History teaches that progress moves forward, each invention resting on the shoulders of earlier ones. Fire to bronze, bronze to iron, iron to steel. But this object interrupts that steady rhythm. It suggests a jump, a surge of understanding without visible preparation. And perhaps more unsettling, it suggests disappearance. Not destruction by accident. Not decay through neglect. Something quieter, a fading, a removal. What if the past was not primitive, but deliberately reduced? The thought does not demand belief. It asks for consideration. Because the artifact does exist. It sits under glass, patient and untroubled by debate. It carries no explanation. It offers no defense. It simply waits. And as one stands before it, a gentle unease begins to form. If a single object can challenge an entire narrative, what happens when more are found? This is only the beginning. The artifact in the quiet room is not alone. Far from that museum, beneath different skies and in distant climates, other objects have surfaced in similar silence. None announced themselves as revolutionary. None were wrapped in headlines or guarded by armed escorts. They entered the world gently, like stones lifted from water and placed on a shelf. In the depths of a Mediterranean shipwreck, divers once retrieved a corroded cluster of bronze fragments. At first, it seemed no different from the nails and tools scattered across the ocean floor. Yet once cleaned, subtle ridges appeared, grooves aligned with delicate precision, as though designed to fit within a larger mechanical rhythm. The site report described it as navigation-related debris. The phrase lingered, imprecise and cautious. In a desert tomb, sealed by sand and centuries, archaeologists uncovered a small metallic sphere resting among pottery and textiles. Its exterior bore fine incisions forming symmetrical patterns, not decorative, but measured. Inside, faint traces suggested movement. The initial field notes mentioned internal segmentation. Later, publications referred to it only as a ceremonial object of uncertain function. High in a mountain temple chamber, hidden behind layers of stone, a slab was found fitted with channels too regular to be erosion. Each cut was exact in depth and spacing. When measured, the angles reflected mathematical consistency far beyond aesthetic preference. Officially, it became part of a ritual drainage system. One by one, these discoveries emerged. Different continents, different centuries, different cultures, none connected. And yet, when placed side by side, in careful observation, something begins to feel familiar. Precision appears suddenly in the archaeological record, then vanishes, materials chosen not merely for ornament, but for performance, techniques that seem fully mature, with no crude ancestors buried beneath them. History prefers development in stages, simple forms leading to complex ones, trial preceding mastery. But these objects suggest arrival without apprenticeship, craftsmanship that does not struggle. It simply exists. The early excavation notes sometimes spoke more directly. Phrases like unexpected mechanical refinement or advanced rotational geometry appeared in preliminary drafts. Yet by the time official reports were printed, the language softened. Words became broader, less definitive. Complexity was reframed as symbolism. There is no evidence of coordinated concealment, no secret council of historians adjusting narratives in hidden rooms. It is something quieter than that. Institutions rely on continuity. Textbooks require coherence. Funding aligns with established frameworks. When an anomaly appears, the simplest resolution is often reclassification. A mechanical fragment becomes decorative. A geometric tool becomes ceremonial. An engineered cavity becomes ritualistic architecture. The object remains, only its explanation shifts. How many decorative objects were carefully reclassified so they would no longer raise questions? The mind resists abrupt change. It seeks comfort in progression that feels orderly and predictable. When evidence challenges that order, the response is often not denial, but containment. An anomaly becomes isolated, stripped of implication, placed in a display case, with neutral phrasing. Visitors pass by unaware that what they are observing may once have been considered something far more complex. None of these discoveries alone demands a rewriting of history. But together, they whisper. Their shared trait is not grandeur, it is precision without precedent, skill without visible lineage, appearance without continuation. The pattern is subtle enough to ignore, and perhaps that is why it has endured. If a single artifact raised doubt, scattered echoes deepen it, because coincidence becomes harder to maintain when repetition enters the frame. And so the question expands beyond one impossible object. If advanced craftsmanship appears across civilizations, briefly and mysteriously, what do we truly know about the limits of those societies? Before assuming suppression or disappearance, something must first be examined. How certain are we of the timeline itself? The story we are taught is elegant in its simplicity. Humanity begins with stone, rough tools shaped by careful hands, chipped into edges, sharp enough to hunt and carve. Fire follows, then shelter, then language, shaped into shared memory. Slowly, patiently, knowledge accumulates. Stone yields to copper, copper yields to bronze, bronze yields to iron, each era named after its dominant material, each discovery building upon the last. Irrigation channels redirect rivers, farming settles tribes into cities, writing records, harvests and laws, astronomy guides planting seasons and navigation. It is a powerful narrative, orderly, understandable, comforting. Across centuries, innovation appears as a ladder, each rung supporting the next. Nothing leaps too far beyond its foundation. Tools improve gradually, Skills refine across generations. Societies expand in proportion to their understanding. And within this accepted climb, ancient engineers aligned monuments with solstices using patient observation. Metallurgists experimented with heat and alloy until stronger tools emerged. Early scholars mapped the skies without telescopes, tracking movements of distant lights through disciplined attention. There is no need to diminish this achievement. On the contrary, it demands respect. Yet, as the timeline unfolds, faint irregularities emerge. Some monuments require astronomical alignments precise to fractions of a degree, suggesting observational systems of remarkable sophistication. Certain metalwork appears suddenly with advanced techniques, hardened edges, and complex alloys, without clear transitional stages. Mechanical insights surface that imply mathematical frameworks rarely preserved in earlier records. The anomalies are not explosive. They are quiet, subtle enough to overlook. The official story explains such moments as isolated genius, cultural acceleration, or loss of intermediate examples through time. After all, not everything survives. Fire consumes libraries. Wars erase workshops. Moisture dissolves parchment. What remains is rarely complete. This is where the fracture widens slightly. History is built from what endures. Surviving fragments form the scaffolding of our understanding. But survival is accidental. A single preserved scroll can shape an era of interpretation. A single burned archive can erase entire. Silence enters not as evidence of absence, but as consequence of destruction. And silence is persuasive. If no prototypes are found, perhaps they never existed. If no manuals are recovered, perhaps the knowledge was never widespread. Yet this reasoning depends entirely on what time is chosen to spare. Imagine a modern city unearthed 2,000 years from now. Suppose only scattered metal shards remain stripped of context. Without blueprints or explanation, would future scholars fully grasp the complexity once present? Or would they construct a gradual narrative from incomplete remains? The timeline may indeed be accurate. The sequence of materials, the rise of cities, the arc of invention, all supported by countless discoveries. But accuracy does not guarantee completeness. What if our timeline is accurate but incomplete? That question does not accuse historians of error. It acknowledges limitation. Every model of the past is provisional, awaiting new fragments to reshape its contours. And now, standing before mechanical artifacts that seem out of sequence, architectural feats that outpace visible development, and metallurgical leaps that appear without apprenticeship, the mind hesitates. Perhaps the mystery is not that ancient societies reached moments of extraordinary capability. Perhaps the true enigma lies in what followed. Because over and over again, throughout history, knowledge appears and then recedes. Chapter 1 closes not with certainty, but with doubt seeded gently beneath the surface. The question no longer concerns a single device resting in quiet light. It concerns disappearance. And in the next descent, we will ask why knowledge does not always move forward, but sometimes vanishes entirely. If progress were a straight line, history would feel steady. Each discovery would anchor itself firmly to the next, building upward without hesitation. But when the record is examined closely, that line begins to waver. Across distant ages and separate continents, moments of striking advancement emerge like bright flares in the dark. Cities rise with complex infrastructure. Navigation techniques stretch across open seas. Metalwork achieves surprising delicacy. Astronomy reaches mathematical sophistication that borders on poetic precision. And then, almost without warning, the light dims, libraries burn, empires fracture under internal strain, trade routes collapse. Within a few generations, techniques once common become rare. Artisans disappear. Recipes for alloy, methods of calculation, architectural blueprints, all thin out until only fragments remain. The tone here is not dramatic. There are no villains yet, no grand conspiracies. There is simply fragility. Knowledge does not survive on invention alone. It depends on transmission. Teachers must train apprentices. Workshops must remain funded. Stability must allow time for refinement. When social order shakes, Even slightly complex systems struggle first. In one era, a coastal civilization mastered advanced maritime tools, calculating routes with remarkable accuracy. After invasion and political fracture, those instruments vanished from the archaeological record. Centuries passed before similar navigational precision returned. In another region, intricate metal casting reached extraordinary quality. Then famine struck. Urban centers dispersed. The next generation inherited only partial understanding. Later historians assumed the technique had not existed at all. Patterns like these repeat often enough to feel less like coincidence and more like rhythm. Yet, sometimes, the evidence carries a sharper edge. In certain collapses, destruction appears deliberate. Records describe rulers ordering archives, purged to consolidate power. Religious leaders condemning specific texts as dangerous. Workshops dismantled, not because they failed, but because they threatened existing structures. Artisans in specialized trades were absorbed into controlled institutions, their knowledge compartmentalized. Some were reassigned to serve military or spiritual authorities. Others disappeared entirely from public record. The motivations remain difficult to untangle. Fear of rebellion, desire for monopoly, belief that certain skills were too powerful for widespread access, preservation of hierarchy. History rarely provides confession. When knowledge disappears, is it always tragedy, or sometimes intention? The question lingers gently rather than sharply. Not every collapse results from calculated suppression. Fires spread accidentally. Earthquakes level cities without ideology. Empires fall to exhaustion, but there are moments when the erasure feels precise. Certain manuscripts were catalogued meticulously, only to be removed from circulation without clear explanation. Descriptions of mechanical tools are hinted at in early documents, then absent in later copies. References remain, but details fade, as if edited away rather than burned. Leaders value control. A society's stability depends in part on predictable structures. If a new technology shifts economic power or challenges religious authority, the response may not be enthusiastic embrace. Limitation can appear safer than upheaval. Still, caution does not equal suppression by secret design. Human behavior is often more practical than sinister. When complexity threatens cohesion, narrowing access can feel responsible. The fragility of knowledge is undeniable, but what unsettles is how often disappearance aligns with moments of concentrated authority. Perhaps the erasure of certain technologies was accidental, scattered across wars and natural disasters. Or perhaps in rare instances it was deliberate, an attempt to regulate forces perceived as destabilizing. The pattern alone does not prove intent. It proves vulnerability, and vulnerability invites a deeper question. If knowledge can vanish through instability, or be restricted through authority, who decides what is preserved? Who determines which texts are copied and which are left to crumble? To understand disappearance, we must look toward those who guarded information itself. Across centuries, knowledge rarely traveled freely. It moved through narrow corridors, carried by hands authorized to preserve it. Monasteries guarded manuscripts behind thick stone walls. Royal courts funded scholars whose work reflected the interests of the throne. Universities formed circles of learning that defined what was acceptable inquiry and what wandered too far. These institutions were not villains. In many cases, they were protectors. Without scribes copying fragile texts by candlelight, much of ancient philosophy and science would have disappeared completely. Without royal patronage, ambitious engineering projects would never have been attempted. But where knowledge is preserved, it is also curated. A scribe copying a manuscript chose which works deserved effort. Ink and parchment were precious. Every page required time. Decisions were made quietly, guided by belief, usefulness, or political climate. Texts that aligned with doctrine were replicated. Others faded as their copies deteriorated. Leaders, too, sponsored inventions selectively. Military advances flourished under threat. Agricultural techniques were funded during famine, but mechanical curiosities or speculative devices sometimes found less support, especially if their purpose did not clearly serve authority. Ideas that challenged spiritual or political frameworks were often labeled dangerous, not always violently suppressed, sometimes simply ignored. To dismiss a concept as magical, irrational, or heretical was enough to prevent further exploration. In certain medieval archives, references appear to machines capable of astonishing tasks, automated mechanisms, self-moving statues, mirrors that concentrated light with uncanny intensity. The descriptions are brief, almost casual, as if the reader were expected to understand their construction already. But the instructions are missing. One manuscript hints at a device able to track celestial movements with complex gearing. Another mentions a chamber resonating with acoustic precision to amplify sound across vast halls. Yet the passages end abruptly. No diagrams follow. No detailed explanation survives in the same volume. What was written in the pages that no longer exist? Sometimes history is lost through fire and flood. Other times it is lost through omission. A single missing folio can erase technical clarity. A decision not to copy one manuscript can shift the intellectual course of an entire region. In certain cases, unconventional mechanical ideas were categorized as curiosities rather than serious engineering. By framing them as spectacle or allegory, institutions reduced their perceived importance. Once placed outside formal scholarship, such ideas rarely regained central attention. Power and information have always intertwined. Those who controlled what was written and replicated shaped the boundaries of possibility. Yet this control often stemmed not from malice, but from caution. Stability mattered. Maintaining social cohesion mattered. Fear can be subtle. If a new device shifts economic power or challenges spiritual interpretation, guardians of knowledge may hesitate. Regulating access may feel responsible rather than oppressive. And over time, hesitation accumulates. The historical record we inherit is not a perfect mirror of everything known. It is a filtered reflection, shaped by survival, preference, and human judgment. Most of that filtering was practical. Some of it may have been protective. The effect remains the same. Fragments of references linger without detail. Names of devices appear without blueprint. Accounts suggest mechanisms beyond their era's apparent toolkit. Yet, the continuity required to reconstruct them fully is missing. An invisible layer seems to hover over history, not a curtain, but a sieve. If gatekeepers influenced what endured, then disappearance becomes more complex than accident. It becomes selective, and that leads to a quieter, more personal question. Was ancient technology truly ahead of its time, or did humanity reach heights that were repeatedly reset, leaving only scattered traces behind? If we step back from individual artifacts, from burned libraries and silent manuscripts, a larger shape begins to form. It is less a line than a rhythm. Civilizations rise not gradually forever, but in waves. Growth gathers momentum. Discovery accelerates. Systems expand. Then something shifts. History records golden ages with reverence. Periods of astonishing creativity, scientific precision, architectural ambition. Cities glow with innovation. Knowledge spreads through trade and correspondence. For a moment, it feels as though progress has secured its footing. And then decline enters quietly, not always through invasion, not always through catastrophe. Sometimes through internal strain. Resources stretch thin. Institutions become rigid. Complexity increases beyond sustainability. What was once brilliance becomes burden. Within a generation or two, subtle erosion begins. Crafts once common become specialized. Specialists disappear without successors. Techniques are simplified for survival. The extraordinary contracts into the practical. When viewed across centuries, the pattern resembles breath. Expansion, contraction, expansion again. Perhaps ancient devices do not represent anomalies at all. Perhaps they are remnants from prior peaks, moments when understanding reached heights later lost through fragmentation. A gear mechanism without clear lineage may not be ahead of its time, but behind it, surviving from an era whose continuity failed. The pacing slows here, because certainty fades. The artifact beneath museum light returns in memory, no longer merely mysterious, It now feels resilient. It endured invasion, decay, disinterest, and skepticism. It survived while the knowledge surrounding it dissolved. Its silence no longer suggests absence alone. It suggests interruption. Imagine a society where astronomy, engineering, and mathematics intertwined in sophisticated harmony. Now imagine that harmony fractured, not entirely destroyed, but scattered, pieces embedded in architecture, fragments hidden in ritual, mechanical devices buried for reasons no longer recorded. The cycle does not require conspiracy. It requires fragility. Human systems depend on stability as much as creativity. Remove one for long enough, and the other falters. Transmission falters. Memory thins. What remains is partial, misinterpreted, or simplified. If knowledge vanished before, what guarantees it won't vanish again? The question carries no threat. It carries reflection. Modern civilization prides itself on digital permanence, global storage, cloud archives stretching across continents. Yet, our complexity is unprecedented. Supply chains span oceans. Infrastructure depends on layered expertise few individuals fully comprehend. Remove stability, even briefly, and the cascade could be swift. The thought is not alarmist. It is humbling. Perhaps the real mystery is not whether ancient technology existed. The fragments suggest it did, at least in certain moments. The deeper question is whether humanity repeatedly approaches thresholds of complexity that strain its capacity to preserve itself. The artifact remains in its quiet room, patient and unchanged by interpretation. It has outlasted narratives before. It may outlast this one. What matters now is not proving hidden supremacy or exposing secret suppression. What matters is recognizing the rhythm. Growth, peak, fracture, reconstruction. And if we are indeed participants in such a cycle, then the investigation must move beyond disappearance. We must begin examining the devices themselves, how they functioned, why their precision unsettles even modern engineers, what they reveal not about lost glory, but about recurring vulnerability. The next chapter descends into the mechanisms at the heart of the mystery. The sea keeps its secrets in layers, beneath shifting currents and drifting light. The wreck rested undisturbed for centuries. Its wooden hull had surrendered long ago, collapsing softly into the seabed. Amphorae lay scattered like fallen chess pieces. Bronze statues, once polished and admired, wore coats of green corrosion. Sand moved in slow breaths around everything. Divers descended in careful silence. Their lamps cut narrow beams through blue darkness, illuminating fragments of a forgotten voyage. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Cargo, stone. It looked like debris. Just metal, hardened into an irregular mass. It was lifted gently, catalogued without excitement, and sent upward toward air and analysis. Months passed before its significance surfaced. Conservators began the patient work of cleaning. Layer by layer, crust dissolved. Beneath the hardened shell, something circular emerged. Then another thin ridged edges, teeth along a wheel. A second gear meshed against the first, with deliberate spacing. The room fell quiet. It was not decorative. It was mechanical. Later imaging revealed more than could be seen by eye. Within the fragments were interlocking bronze gears arranged in compact alignment. Each tooth was cut with astonishing regularity. Their ratios followed mathematical relationships that mirrored celestial cycles. The movement of the moon, the rhythm of eclipses, the wandering paths of planets. The device was small enough to hold in two hands, yet it mapped the heavens. Researchers reconstructed its function carefully, avoiding exaggeration. When turned, the mechanism would have displayed astronomical predictions, with precision far beyond what was expected from its era. Dials, pointers, calibrated scales, an entire model of the sky, compressed into metal and calculation. What unsettled scholars was not merely its complexity, but its isolation. There were no surviving workshops, filled with half-finished attempts. No primitive prototypes showing gradual refinement. No simpler versions, scattered through earlier archaeological layers. It appeared suddenly in the historical record, already intricate, already mastered. And then it vanished. Mechanical clocks did not emerge widely until far later, yet here, submerged for 2,000 years, lay evidence that someone understood rotational mathematics and metal cutting at a level rarely acknowledged. The sea had preserved what land might have destroyed. Reconstructed animations now show the instrument turning as it once did, silent wheels rotating in measured harmony. There is no drama in its motion, only patience, precision, confidence. It feels less like invention and more like culmination. How does a civilization invent something centuries ahead of its time and then forget how to build it? Perhaps it did not forget entirely. Perhaps the knowledge persisted in fragile manuscripts later burned. Perhaps the artisans who built it trained only a handful of apprentices. Perhaps political upheaval fractured the networks that sustained such refinement. Or perhaps this was not ahead of its time at all. Perhaps we are misreading the timeline. The device rests in controlled lighting, now removed from its ocean silence. Visitors peer through glass, aware they are looking at something extraordinary, though few fully grasp why. It challenges without shouting. It proves without accusing. It suggests that ancient minds understood celestial mechanics deeply enough to translate the sky into gears. That mathematics was not confined to parchment, but embodied in bronze. And if one mechanical marvel can rise from the seabed, preserved by accident and chance, what else might remain buried? Misidentified, misinterpreted, or dismissed. The focus shifts from water to stone, from portable instrument to monument, because sometimes the most remarkable machines are not small enough to hold, but vast enough to stand upon. The sea offered bronze gears hidden in coral and salt. Now the scene shifts to stone, vast, immovable, exposed beneath open sky. In high mountain plateaus and desert valleys, ancient walls rise from the earth with quiet confidence. Granite blocks weighing dozens of tons sit against one another so tightly that even today, a thin blade refuses to slide between them. Their surfaces are smooth, their edges clean, their angles deliberate. There is no need for dramatic language. The stones speak plainly. Look closely, and you begin to notice lines, not cracks, but cuts, straight grooves running with unnerving consistency. In some sites, cylindrical holes pierce through hard rock, leaving behind spiral markings that wind down their inner walls. In others, channels appear carved with depth, so uniform, they seem measured by something more than hand and guesswork. Quarries nearby reveal similar traces. Massive blocks partially freed from bedrock, bearing parallel striations across their faces. It is clear the builders understood stone intimately. They shaped it, transported it, fitted it with patience and skill. Mainstream explanations describe copper or bronze tools combined with abrasive sand, and in controlled experiments, researchers have attempted to recreate these techniques. They strike, grind, polish slowly. Results appear. It is possible, they conclude, yet something lingers. Replicated cuts often lack the crispness found in certain ancient examples. Drill experiments produce grooves, but their spiral patterns tend to differ in pitch from the originals. Polished granite can be achieved, but the time required stretches into weeks of labor for even modest surfaces. The mystery deepens, not because ancient engineers lacked brilliance, but because their achievements seem too consistent, too efficient. Then microscopic analysis enters the frame. When researchers examined the interior surfaces of specific drill cores under magnification, they observed spiral markings, suggesting a rate of penetration higher than what conventional hand-powered drills typically produce. The grooves imply rotational speed and downward force that challenge simple reconstruction. This does not prove hidden machinery. It does not demand revision overnight. But it leaves a subtle suspension in the air. If tools were entirely primitive, why do some markings resemble controlled, high-speed motion? Perhaps the answer lies in forgotten techniques, rather than advanced machines. Perhaps ancient craftsmen refine their methods to levels rarely documented. Or perhaps the materials used, stones as abrasive agents, organic compounds, unknown alloys, were more effective than assumed. Still, the pattern echoes what we saw beneath the sea. Precision, without gradual evidence of evolution. Massive walls assembled with geometric confidence. Drill holes carved into granite with astonishing uniformity. Surfaces polished beyond decorative necessity. The result feels less like experiment and more like mastery. What if the real secret was never the stone, but the method now erased? Knowledge can vanish not only in texts, but in practice. A technique passed from master to apprentice for centuries may leave no written trace. Once the chain breaks, replication becomes guesswork. What appears impossible may simply be incomplete understanding. Standing before these walls, one senses that ancient builders did not struggle clumsily with rock. They shaped it with intention, guided by principles that felt natural to them. From interlocking gears to interlocking granite, the pattern strengthens. Sophistication appears without visible scaffolding beneath it. And that raises a quieter, deeper question. If precision in metal and precision in stone both exceed expectations, what foundation supported them? Was there a shared scientific understanding, subtle, systematic, that once unified these achievements? The final descent of this chapter moves beyond materials and into mathematics, where the most invisible structures of all may have been built. The walls do not speak loudly. They whisper in angles, carved into temple corridors and etched along sacred chambers, are symbols that seem decorative at first glance. Spirals, grids, repeating motifs that frame doors and altars. Visitors admire their beauty without considering their proportions. Yet, when measured carefully, those proportions begin to reveal intention. Ratios appear again and again. Distances between columns correspond to predictable intervals. The length of a hall aligns precisely with the rising sun during specific days of the year. Openings frame constellations that return to their positions with patient regularity. What feels mystical begins to feel structured. Ancient civilizations were not passive observers of the sky. They tracked planetary cycles across generations. They recorded eclipses with careful notation. They predicted the wanderings of celestial bodies, long before telescopes refined those calculations. Their knowledge of geometry allowed them to shape stone into alignment with events invisible to casual watchers. And often, they encoded that knowledge in story. Myths speak of sky gods crossing the heavens in fixed paths. They tell of serpents swallowing the sun, of twin deities marking seasons with silent precision. Beneath the poetry lies pattern. Beneath the narrative lies timing. When a culture lacks paper resilient enough to last millennia, embedding knowledge in ritual and architecture becomes a durable archive. A building aligned with solstice sunlight will reveal that alignment long after its builders' names are forgotten. A story retold each year ensures that certain events are anticipated and understood. The debate shifts here, almost imperceptibly. Perhaps technology did not vanish because it was mechanical. Perhaps it dissolved because it was intellectual. Mathematics leaves little trace unless recorded and transmitted carefully. If those responsible for preserving it were lost or redirected, the continuity breaks quietly. Mechanical devices like the clockwork from the sea make more sense when placed atop a foundation of advanced astronomical calculation. Interlocking gears are less astonishing when the mathematical relationships guiding them already exist in cultural memory. The true surprise may not be the device itself, but our assumption that such mathematics required visible infrastructure. Ancient knowledge systems were layered. A priest reciting myth may also have been tracking planetary motion. A temple layout may have doubled as a calendar. A ritual path traced across stone could encode geometric principles few outside that circle understood. What if the blueprints were never burned, only disguised? Modern researchers often seek direct documentation, clear instruction, explicit diagrams. But when knowledge hides within symbolism, reading requires translation rather than excavation. If mathematics traveled through metaphor, then misunderstanding becomes easy. Once language shifts, the absence of explicit manuals does not guarantee absence of understanding. It may reflect difference in medium. The sky itself served as reference. Architecture became calculation carved in rock. And if the intellectual framework behind ancient precision was embedded in myth and alignment rather than paper and ink, then its loss becomes easier to imagine. Myths can survive as stories long after their scientific core fades from awareness. Alignments can persist as beauty long after their astronomical purpose is forgotten. The puzzle no longer centers on whether advanced knowledge existed. The fragments in bronze and granite suggest that it did. at least in moments. The deeper question now concerns preservation. If knowledge was hidden in plain sight, woven through story, symbol, and structure, how much of it remains unread? The next descent moves beyond accidental loss and toward a more unsettling possibility. Perhaps some knowledge was not simply lost. Perhaps it was placed carefully out of reach. Darkness first. Not the vast darkness of space or the shifting darkness of the sea, but the compact stillness beneath stone. A wall long mistaken for solid bedrock fractures under careful pressure. Dust loosens, that has not moved for centuries exhales into the present. A beam of light slips through the opening. Beyond it, a chamber waits intact, deliberate, undisturbed. There are no signs of collapse, no chaotic scattering of debris. The space was not crushed by disaster, it was sealed. The walls themselves tell the story. Stones fitted in layers not for support, but for concealment, mortar applied with restraint. The outer facade crafted to appear permanent, discouraging entry. Whoever closed this room did not intend for it to be found casually. Inside, objects rest with intention. Bronze instruments arranged in careful alignment. Containers stacked with balance. Tablets placed upright rather than dropped. Nothing suggests haste. Nothing feels abandoned mid-crisis. Across continents and centuries, similar scenes have unfolded. Beneath temple foundations, caches of tools and mechanisms have been uncovered. Stored deep, where sunlight would never reach, pyramidal substructures, chambers appear with contents wrapped and insulated against moisture. In desert caves, narrow tunnels lead to alcoves, holding artifacts too refined to be ordinary offerings. These were not accidents of architecture, they were repositories. The assumption often follows a predictable path: sacred deposit, ceremonial sacrifice, symbolic farewell. And perhaps sometimes that is true. Ritual accompanies preservation in many cultures. Yet the sacred condition of certain objects complicates that explanation. In some chambers, mechanisms are found partially dismantled, components separated cleanly, pins removed, gear teeth intact but disengaged. Inscriptions along their surfaces appear scratched through, not violently but decisively. A symbol once engraved with pride has been crossed out with steady intent. The act feels neither frantic nor destructive. It feels procedural. Why dismantle an object before burial? Why scratch out marks that could not have offended stone or time? Such gestures suggest decommissioning. Like a modern machine powered down before retirement, these artifacts seem to have been rendered inoperable before interment, as though their makers wished to ensure they would not function again, least not easily. The silence deepens here. If collapse were imminent, if invasion or disaster forced concealment, one might expect hurried burial, loose placement, signs of fear. But these chambers reflect order, care, planning. What compels a civilization to bury its own achievements? The answer may not rest in paranoia or superstition. It may dwell in responsibility. Knowledge, once fully realized, carries consequence. A mechanism capable of predicting celestial cycles can guide agriculture, but it can also shape power. Control over timekeeping is control over time. Ritual. Control over ritual is influence over society. A tool refined beyond common comprehension shifts authority toward those who understand it. Perhaps burial served preservation during instability. Hiding devices beneath sacred sites could protect them from theft or misuse. But deliberate deactivation implies more than protection from outsiders. It implies hesitation about insiders as well. Imagine a group of skilled artisans and scholars deciding that certain instruments should not remain active, not destroyed in anger, but retired in caution, stored deep where memory might one day retrieve them, but immediate access denied. The chamber remains quiet long after excavation. Visitors observe photographs of its contents in controlled museum halls, unaware that the arrangement beneath ground once resembled a vault, a tomb. The pattern emerging is no longer about isolated artifacts. It is about intent. These were not relics left behind. They were hidden, and if they were hidden, The next question moves gently yet decisively toward motive. Fear does not always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it whispers through decisions made in darkness. The next descent explores what ancient societies may have feared, not about ignorance, but about knowledge itself. Stone chambers and sealed vaults suggest intention. Now, the focus shifts inward, toward the human mind that chose concealment. Throughout history, knowledge has never been neutral. A new technique, a new tool, a new method of communication can tilt entire societies. When printing spread across continents, authority shifted from throne and pulpit to page. When navigation improved, maps redrew empires. When information moves freely, power reorganizes itself. It has always been this way. Astronomical prediction grants control over seasons, ritual calendars, and agricultural trust. If a priest can announce the precise return of an eclipse, faith deepens. If a ruler monopolizes that, calculation, loyalty follows. Mechanical devices capable of calculating celestial cycles do more than mark time. They shape belief. Advanced engineering alters labor systems. Precision tools increase efficiency. Knowledge that condenses complex mathematics into portable instruments concentrates influence in the hands of those who understand them, unless controlled. Ancient texts occasionally whisper unease. Stories describe forbidden arts taught too soon. Fire stolen from gods. Towers built toward heaven. Weapons so powerful they threatened balance itself. These narratives often end with punishment, not merely for defiance, but for excess. It is easy to dismiss such tales as metaphor detached from reality. Yet metaphors arise from lived experience. Cultural memory absorbs anxiety. When societies encounter technologies that stretch ethical capacity, caution becomes myth. What if the danger was not ignorance, but understanding too much? Knowledge can destabilize hierarchy without violence. If ordinary citizens grasp celestial mechanics, rituals lose mystique. If artisans acquire advanced tools, centralized control weakens. Authority depends not only on strength, but on exclusive comprehension. This does not imply malicious rulers destroying enlightenment in secret. More often, it reflects fear of disorder. A society already strained by inequality or instability may hesitate to unleash disruptive innovation. Legends of divine punishment may encode this hesitation. They teach restraint. They warn that capability must align with maturity. Stories become boundaries, guiding behavior, without explicit censorship. Burial, in this light, appears less conspiratorial and more protective. A mechanism sealed beneath a temple foundation could symbolize both reverence and restraint. A dismantled device may represent recognition that power without preparation invites fracture. Modern parallels are subtle but familiar. Nuclear technology promised energy and devastation. Digital networks connect humanity while destabilizing information ecosystems. Each advancement forcing ethical negotiation. Ancient societies were no different. If astronomical instruments concentrated influence too sharply, leaders may have limited access. If mechanical calculation threatened established interpretation of the cosmos, guardians of tradition may have acted cautiously. Knowledge centralizes power unless dispersed responsibly. And so, silence follows not always as suppression, but as strategy. The buried chambers from earlier reveal decisions made quietly. They suggest that creators and leaders alike recognized consequence. Removing certain technologies from active circulation may have felt like maintaining equilibrium. Still, fear alone cannot explain the precision of preservation. Caution might justify restriction. But why protect devices so carefully for centuries? The next question presses deeper. If knowledge was hidden intentionally, was it meant to remain buried forever? Or was it stored with the expectation that one day, under different conditions, it would surface again? The chamber does not feel like a grave. When archaeologists brush soil from bronze and stone, there is a quiet care in their movement, as though they are disturbing something intentionally placed rather than abandoned. The arrangement, object suggests order, not panic. The walls surrounding them were built thick, reinforced against intrusion. The entrances were concealed, not by accident, but by design. What if burial was not erasure? Across ancient cultures, foundation deposits were common. Builders sealed small collections of tools, inscriptions, and symbolic objects beneath temples and city gates. These were gestures toward the future messages embedded in architecture. Some were offerings, some were records, some were reminders. Not everything hidden was meant to disappear. Consider where many of these complex artifacts are found. Deep beneath monumental structures built on stable ground. Within chambers carved into bedrock, protected from flood and fire. In caves, resistant to erosion. These are not random burial sites. They are locations chosen for endurance. If one intended an object to survive catastrophe, one would choose such places. And catastrophe was not theoretical. Ancient societies faced drought, war, seismic shifts, political collapse. They understood fragility intimately. Preservation required foresight. Perhaps certain devices were stored away, not because they threatened authority, but because they required stability to function properly. Without an intact network of trained individuals and shared understanding, advanced knowledge could become dangerous or meaningless. So it was sealed, not destroyed, not smashed beyond recognition, deactivated, then placed carefully out of reach. The strongest twist lies here. Many of these objects were discovered intact centuries later, but stripped of context. The language once used to explain them had changed. The cultural framework that supported their interpretation had faded. Symbols that once encoded calculation appeared decorative. Mechanisms designed for precision were labeled ritual. The devices survived. The explanation did not. Imagine preserving a complex instrument in a stone chamber with the hope that one day it would be understood again. But when rediscovered, it is approached without the intellectual key required to decode it. It becomes anomaly rather than inheritance. The artifact beneath museum glass returns to mind. So does the clockwork lifted from the sea. So do the carved channels in granite walls. Each could represent fragments from a larger body, understanding intentionally shielded during instability. Were these devices buried to keep us ignorant, or to protect us from ourselves? The question carries weight without accusation. Perhaps their creators recognized the delicate balance between discovery and maturity. Perhaps they believed that knowledge, once sufficiently tested by time, would resurface naturally, curiosity and patience. The soil being brushed away in modern excavations feels less like uncovering treasure and more like reopening a message. If context has dissolved, interpretation falters. The meaning, once obvious to its makers, becomes obscured beneath layers of assumption. The camera lingers on a conservator's careful hands as grains of earth fall from engraved metal. The object reveals its form slowly. It does not whisper secrets. It does not beg to be understood. It waits. And if waiting was always part of the design, then a deeper possibility emerges. Perhaps more has already been found than we recognize. Perhaps fragments of preserved systems sit in archives, mislabeled or overlooked, waiting for eyes capable of reading them correctly. The next chapter confronts that possibility directly. If knowledge was stored for rediscovery, have we already rediscovered it? The ruins fall away, and the setting shifts forward in time. The air smells not of dust and limestone, but of oil, ink, and metal filings. Wooden floors creak beneath heavy boots. Shelves sag under stacks of notebooks. A single lamp throws a warm circle of light across a cluttered workbench. It is the late 19th century. Electricity hums uncertainly through new wires. Steam engines roar across continents. Innovation feels unstoppable. Yet in small workshops and quiet studies, some inventors are looking backward rather than forward. They lean over translated manuscripts copied from fading scrolls. They measure temple foundations, not for restoration, but for proportion. They sketch geometric ratios found in ancient walls, fascinated by alignments too precise to be accidental. The past does not appear primitive to them. It appears encoded. One engineer studies accounts of mirrors said to concentrate sunlight into fierce beams. Another examines descriptions of self-moving statues powered by hidden mechanisms. A third pores over diagrams resembling complex gear assemblies preserved in fragments. These inventors do not treat myths as fantasy alone. They treat them as clues. Their notebooks fill with reinterpretations. Temple layouts become mathematical grids. Allegorical texts transform into engineering puzzles. Phrases once dismissed as poetic exaggeration are reconsidered through mechanical imagination. Could rotating divine instruments have been astronomical calculators? Could sacred chambers described as humming with energy have been acoustic experiments? No, grand announcements follow these questions. Instead, prototypes appear quietly. Patents from the era reveal devices strikingly reminiscent of ancient hints, precision gear systems mapping cycles of motion, solar concentrators inspired by classical references, resonant chambers designed to amplify vibration. These were radical ideas for their time, bordering on improbable. Investors hesitated. Institutions questioned practicality. Newspapers oscillated between fascination and ridicule. Some inventors lost everything pursuing these concepts. Workshops closed. Projects were labeled speculative. Others were absorbed into larger corporations. Their ideas refined quietly behind corporate doors. A few vanished from public attention altogether, leaving behind only patent numbers and scattered correspondence. Were they visionaries ahead of their era, or were they rediscovering threads once woven into ancient systems? The pattern does not suggest conspiracy. It suggests discomfort. Innovation that challenges existing frameworks often struggles to find support. When an idea blurs the boundary between archaeology and engineering, skepticism grows sharper. Still, the similarities. An ancient gear mechanism lifted from the sea. A 19th century engineer designing celestial calculators. Temple proportions inspiring structural experimentation. Mythic descriptions of energy reframed as physical possibility. What if modern innovation is not invention, but rediscovery? The thought does not diminish contemporary brilliance. It enriches it. Progress may not be a clean break from the past, but a cycle of forgetting and remembering. Ideas once embedded in architecture and story might resurface through curious minds, willing to read between lines. The forgotten inventors of dim workshops rarely saw themselves as reopening ancient doors. They simply followed patterns that made sense to them. Yet their designs echo fragments uncovered in sealed chambers and sunken wrecks. Some succeeded modestly, others faded into obscurity. Their stories serve as bridges between eras, reminders that knowledge sometimes waits for interpretation rather than creation. And if rediscovery has already happened more than once, if fragments of older frameworks have resurfaced through unconventional thinkers, then a new question emerges. Who decides which ideas endure and which are quietly set aside? Scientific progress moves carefully. It tests, it questions, it repeats. Every claim must pass through layers of scrutiny before it enters the record. This caution is not weakness, it is strength. Without it, speculation would replace evidence, and history would drift into imagination. But caution has weight. When a discovery fits comfortably into established timelines, it is absorbed with little friction. When it does not, the response becomes slower. Papers are reviewed more critically. Language grows measured. Interpretations lean toward the least disruptive explanation. A mechanism found out of chronological sequence may be labeled ceremonial rather than functional. A precisely drilled stone channel becomes ritual rather than technical. A mathematical pattern embedded in architecture is described as symbolic preference instead of calculated design. No secret meeting is required to reach these conclusions, no coordinated decision to suppress. Academic systems are built on consensus, and consensus relies on continuity. Textbooks, careers, funding structures, public trust, all rest on frameworks refined over decades. To alter those frameworks is not impossible, but it demands extraordinary evidence. And extraordinary evidence requires time, resources, and often reputational risk. Imagine being a young scholar presenting a paper that suggests an ancient society possessed mechanical knowledge far beyond accepted norms. The data may be compelling, the measurements precise, yet the implication ripples outward. Conferences, debate, departments question, reviewers request revisions grounded in caution. The scholar learns quickly that reinterpretation carries cost. Funding bodies prefer predictability. Museums craft narratives accessible to broad audiences. Educational systems aim for clarity rather than complexity. Even minor adjustments to historical sequence can cascade through multiple disciplines, so resistance emerges not from hostility, but from stability. History is not rewritten lightly, because too many structures depend on its shape. When anomalies appear, the default response often seeks containment rather than revolution. It is easier to expand the category of ritual than to redraw an era. This does not make scholars adversaries. Most researchers pursue truth with sincerity. Yet institutions are human systems, and human systems resist abrupt change. Suppression, then, does not always wear dramatic clothing. It can arise as collective discomfort, a quiet leaning toward interpretations that preserve order. Over time, repeated conservative classifications form a pattern. Anomalies accumulate in footnotes rather than headlines. How much evidence is required before the past is allowed to change? The question lingers because the answer is fluid. Some paradigms shift quickly once proof becomes overwhelming. Others resist for generations, softened gradually until adjustment feels inevitable. For viewers watching this unfolding narrative, the point is not to undermine scholarship. It is to recognize limitation. Every historical model is provisional, shaped by surviving artifacts and contemporary interpretation. If rediscovery has occurred through curious inventors and unusual findings, yet met hesitation in formal channels, then perhaps the next layer of evidence lies elsewhere, not only in physical machines, but in stories that endured precisely because they were easier to preserve. The next chapter turns toward those stories, legends repeated across cultures, that may contain more than poetry. The camera moves again through museum corridors, past glass cases, and carefully typed labels. Visitors wander slowly, pausing before statues, pottery, weapons. Nothing appears hidden. Everything seems arranged in honest order. Yet sometimes the most curious objects sit quietly without emphasis. A compact bronze assembly, intricate in proportion, labeled simply a ceremonial fragment. A stone disc incised with geometric precision, described as a symbolic emblem. A polished metallic sphere with faint internal cavities, categorized as ritual artifact of unknown purpose. The language is gentle, neutral, reassuring. Few visitors ask why certain objects are assigned sacred meaning rather than practical function. Fewer notice that the same museum may display confirmed tools, chisels, hammers, navigational weights, only a few feet away, in cases marked clearly as functional. Labeling guides perception. When something is introduced as symbolic, the mind stops searching for mechanics. When an object is framed as ritual, inquiry softens into appreciation. But context tells quieter stories. Excavation logs sometimes note where items were found before those notes are condensed into public display summaries. An intricately carved disc discovered alongside workshop debris, a precision-cut stone, retrieved near quarry tools. A bronze instrument located within a ship's cargo hold next to navigational equipment, in the transition from field journal to exhibit plaque. Certain associations fade, perhaps not intentionally removed, but simplified. Streamlined for clarity, the public narrative compresses detail into digestible explanation. No accusation is necessary. Interpretation shapes reality more effectively than concealment. Once a framework exists, primitive tools evolving steadily toward modern engineering, new discoveries are gently adjusted to align. An object that strains continuity is assigned the least disruptive category available. If a mechanical explanation complicates the timeline, a ceremonial one provides stability. This pattern does not require secret suppression. It flows naturally from institutional caution. Curators must choose a description. Scholars must select language. Over time, similar choices reinforce one another. Anomalies accumulate in plain sight. The effect is subtle. Evidence remains visible, accessible, documented. Yet the lens through which it is viewed narrows its implications. Visitors leave with admiration, not unease. What have we already seen, but never truly looked at? The question rests quietly within the mind, because the objects are not hidden in locked vaults. They are displayed under glass, catalogued in databases, referenced in academic papers. Only their potential meaning shifts, according to context. When a pattern begins to form precise cuts in stone, gears mapping celestial cycles, artifacts found in workshops yet labelled ritual, the sensation grows stronger. Perhaps nothing was ever entirely erased. Perhaps the fragments survived consistently. It is our interpretation that fluctuates. The camera lingers on a conservator, adjusting the angle of a display light. The artifact gleams softly. Its description remains unchanged, but the viewer, having travelled through sealed chambers and forgotten patents, now sees differently. The narrative widens here, because if artifacts can be reframed quietly through language, what about stories that endured across millennia? Myths passed from mouth to mouth require even less physical preservation than bronze or granite. The next chapter looks toward those stories, not as fantasy, but as memory encoded in symbol. Long before libraries and laboratories, knowledge arrived as story. In one tale, a figure steals fire from the heavens and carries it down to humanity. Hiding the flame in a hollow reed, the gift transforms darkness into warmth, hunger into nourishment, helplessness into power. But the act is forbidden, and punishment follows swiftly. Fire is not simply a tool. It is a boundary crossed. Elsewhere, a serpent offers wisdom that opens human eyes too quickly. In another tradition, a tower rises toward the sky, built with skill, so ambitious that language itself fractures to halt it. Across continents, across languages, the details shift, yet the pattern remains. Human beings receive something transformative, and with it comes consequence. These myths are often read as moral tales about obedience, but beneath their symbolic surfaces lies something more subtle. Fire altered survival. Metallurgy changed warfare and hierarchy. Navigation allowed empires to stretch across oceans. Astronomy shifted agriculture from guesswork to calculation. Each leap in understanding reconfigured society. Knowledge does not merely illuminate, it rearranges power. The stories rarely condemn curiosity itself. They caution against imbalance, a gift granted too soon, wisdom used without preparation, technology handled without restraint, and across distant civilizations with no confirmed contact. Similar memories surface accounts of golden ages, followed by collapse. Cultures describe eras when humanity flourished beyond ordinary limits, guided by advanced wisdom, only to fall through hubris or catastrophe. The details differ. The rhythm echoes. Could these stories reflect more than imagination? Could they preserve collective memory of rapid advancement, followed by sudden fracture? Societies reaching heights of coordination and technical ability, then destabilizing under their own complexity. Why do so many cultures remember a time when humanity knew too much? The question is not accusatory. It is reflective. If myth encodes psychological truths, they may also encode historical patterns. A community that experiences profound technological transformation might frame it through divine narrative. Stories become containers for events too large to describe plainly. Imagine witnessing metallurgy reshape daily life within a single generation. Tools become stronger, weapons more lethal. Social structures adjust. To a population without scientific vocabulary, the transformation might feel supernatural. Now imagine such change, accelerating beyond stability. Legends of drowned cities, falling skies, divine wrath. These may not point to literal gods, but to thresholds prematurely. Societies, stretching capacity until cohesion splinters. The tone remains quiet because myths are not evidence in themselves. They are reflections, but reflections reveal recurring anxieties. The fear that knowledge granted without preparation destabilizes harmony. The understanding that every gift carries risk. Fire warms and burns. Iron builds and destroys. Astronomy guides and controls. Across mythologies, forbidden knowledge is not condemned outright. It is framed as powerful beyond ordinary responsibility, and power without balance disturbs equilibrium. If the previous chapters have shown that artifacts were buried carefully and devices preserved with hesitation, these legends had emotional context. They suggest awareness. They imply that ancient societies recognized both promise and peril in advancement. Myths become less about capricious gods and more about human thresholds. When knowledge exceeds ethical maturity, caution follows. And if stories were used to warn against unrestrained adoption, perhaps they also carry practical memory. Perhaps beneath allegory lie descriptions of tools and techniques misunderstood over time. If myths encode warnings, might they also encode instructions? The next descent turns toward those passages. Ancient narratives, describing objects that sound uncannily familiar. Ancient texts sometimes read like fragments of dream. They describe chariots that move across the sky without horses, weapons that release blinding rays capable of scorching entire fields, mirrors positioned along coastlines that ignite ships with concentrated light, stones that hum softly and generate unseen force. For centuries, such passages have been dismissed as embellishment, colorful expressions of imagination, and perhaps some are exactly that. Storytellers amplify spectacle. Memory reshapes detail. Drama survives where precision fades. But what if the exaggeration hides something quieter beneath it? When events are retold across generations, technical language erodes. First, the mechanical becomes miraculous. The engineered becomes divine. Without shared vocabulary, a device capable of concentrating sunlight may be described as a sun weapon. A flying apparatus may be rendered as a celestial chariot. A resonant chamber might be remembered as a crystal engine, humming with sacred power. The intention here is not to claim that ancient skies were crowded with aircraft. It is to question translation. In some classical languages, the word later rendered as magic originally meant crafted skill or applied knowledge. Terms translated as divine instrument can also carry meanings closer to engineered device or constructed tool. Over centuries, as spiritual interpretations overshadowed technical ones, nuance shifted. Language is not fixed. When a word describing skilled construction evolves into one implying supernatural force, perception changes. A mechanical process becomes miracle. Consider stories of mirrors that set fleets ablaze. Light concentrated through polished surfaces can produce heat beyond expectation. Scale and efficiency may have been exaggerated, but the principle is physical. Or tales of stones that respond to touch, emitting vibrations or movement. Minerals can generate charge under pressure. Resonance can travel through solid material. When listeners lack scientific explanation, the extraordinary becomes divine. What if ancient miracles were simply technologies without vocabulary? The question does not demand belief in forgotten aircraft. It invites careful reading. It suggests that myth may preserve distorted memory of devices once understood by specialists, but later interpreted symbolically. Descriptions of flying vehicles often include mechanical elements, wheels, compartments, levers. Yet translations emphasize their heavenly nature. Weapons, emitting concentrated beams of energy, may echo early optical experimentation. Accounts of self-moving objects could reflect automation driven by water or weights. As narratives travel across centuries, spectacle outlives specificity. A complex mechanism becomes a wondrous artifact. Its components blur into metaphor, and so the boundary between myth and mechanism softens. When similar stories appear across distant cultures, vehicles of the sky, engines of light, humming stones, it raises a subtle tension. Either imagination converges strikingly, or shared human experience leaves traces in parallel mythologies. There is no need to leap toward extravagant conclusions. It is enough to recognize that translation and time reshape interpretation. If myths preserve distorted memory of tools and technologies, then perhaps they are fragments of something larger, not isolated curiosities, but echoes of systems once widespread enough to leave imprint across cultures. The next reflection deepens the possibility. If memory survived through story, could it be remembering not just individual devices, but a civilization itself, large enough and advanced enough to leave symbolic traces long after its physical structures vanished. The focus widens beyond temples and texts, beyond gears and symbols, toward a deeper horizon. Prehistory itself. Long before written records, coastlines stretched farther into the sea. Valleys now flooded once held rivers and settlements. Ice sheets retreated. Waters rose. Earth shifted. Entire landscapes were redrawn within the span of generations. Geology leaves quiet evidence of upheaval. Shorelines carved into rock now lie submerged beneath waves. Forests preserved in salt rest below modern sea level. What today appears permanent was once unstable. If advanced knowledge emerged early in small, concentrated hubs, along fertile coasts or river deltas, then those centers may not have survived rising waters or seismic change. A regional culture, rich in observation and experimentation, could flourish for centuries. Then a sudden shift, climate oscillation, flood, quake, cooled scatter its people and silence its infrastructure. No need for a global empire, only isolated brilliance. Imagine a coastal society, skilled in astronomy and engineering, building structures aligned with celestial patterns. Their calculations refine agriculture. Their tools improve transport and navigation. Their myths encode observation into tradition. Then sea levels rise. Ports vanish. Workshops collapse. Survivors migrate inland, carrying fragments of memory, but lacking the environment that once supported innovation. Knowledge travels unevenly. Some skills persist, others degrade. Devices too complex to reproduce are remembered through story. Mathematics once precise becomes symbolic. The system dissolves into pieces. The strongest twist is not the existence of catastrophe. It is the possibility that what we call anomalies may be inheritance without continuity. If advanced understanding once existed in regional pockets, then the artifacts we have uncovered, the gear from the sea, the precisely drilled stone, the myth of skybound vehicles, may be remnants rather than anomalies. Pieces of a structure no longer intact. We search for development and see gaps, but gaps may reflect missing chapters rather than improbable leaps. What if we are not the first to believe we stand at the peak of progress? The thought is humbling rather than alarming. Every civilization feels singular. Every age assumes its understanding is definitive. Yet the geological record reminds us that permanence is illusion. Stability can fracture within a lifetime. Submerged ruins, glimpsed through shifting water, carry quiet gravity. Stone foundations beneath the sea suggest habitation where fish now swim. We cannot know precisely what was lost there. We can only acknowledge that loss itself is plausible. Fragments wash ashore in unexpected forms. A mathematical ratio carved into a temple. A mechanical insight hinted at in legend. A tool preserved by accident in a vault. They do not prove forgotten supremacy. They suggest incomplete inheritance. The camera lingers beneath rippling water, where outlines of structures fade into shadow. The scene is calm. No dramatic collapse. Only distance. If knowledge once rose, flourished and fractured, then perhaps our task is not to chase grandeur, but to recognize patterns. Memory may survive in pieces long after context disappears. And if fragments of earlier understanding have already resurfaced quietly, the next question becomes immediate. Are we noticing them as fragments of the past, or mistaking them for entirely new creation in our own age? The image shifts gently. An ancient gear, reconstructed in quiet digital animation, turns with deliberate grace. Its bronze teeth interlock in perfect rhythm, mapping celestial motion, as it once did beneath candlelight. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, that spinning form dissolves into the rotating core of a modern turbine. Metal becomes metal, motion becomes motion. The camera makes no claim that they are identical. It simply allows the rhyme to linger. Across centuries, patterns echo. Ratios embedded in temple walls, once interpreted as sacred geometry, reappear in modern structural engineering as optimal load distribution. The same proportions carved into stone arches now guide skyscraper design. Harmonic intervals once sung in ritual chambers resurface in acoustic research, defining how sound amplifies within concert halls. What was mystical becomes mathematical. Resonance. Once invoked in chants and carved into chambers that hum softly under certain frequencies, re-enters language as wave theory. Celestial alignments, once guiding agricultural ritual, become orbital mechanics, plotted with satellites instead of stone markers. The shift in terminology alters perception, but the underlying principles feel familiar. Ancient builders experimented intuitively with balance and vibration. Modern engineers express those experiments through equations and simulations. The curiosity feels continuous. In several instances, rediscovery occurred indirectly. Researchers investigating unusual acoustic properties in ancient sites stumbled upon insights later applied to modern architecture. Studies of ancient astronomical devices clarified mechanical ratios that inspired more efficient gear systems. Engineers analyzing temple alignments uncovered geometric optimizations applicable to aerospace structures. No one set out to resurrect lost civilizations. They sought solutions to contemporary problems. Yet the path led backward before moving forward. The reveal unfolds without drama. Ancient anomalies sometimes act as catalysts. A peculiar structure prompts re-examination. A mysterious mechanism sparks inquiry into forgotten mathematics. Questions about past precision encourage modern experimentation. The process feels organic. Perhaps the most unsettling part is not that ancient designs reappear, but that they reappear quietly, absorbed into current frameworks without acknowledgement of continuity. Once translated into modern language, their origins blur. A resonant chamber becomes acoustic optimization. A solar-aligned temple becomes passive energy architecture. A celestial calculator becomes mechanical modeling. What if the future we are designing already existed in another form? The thought invites humility rather than spectacle. Innovation may not be linear invention alone. It may be cyclical recognition, ideas surfacing, fading, and surfacing again under different vocabulary. This does not diminish present brilliance. Contemporary science rests on rigorous experimentation and global collaboration. Yet it is possible that certain principles, once embedded in myth and masonry, are being rediscovered because they were always true, waiting for language capable of expressing them clearly. The bridge between eras strengthens here. Ancient artisans observed patterns in sky and stone. Modern engineers analyze those same patterns through data and computation. When a turbine blade adopts harmonic proportions reminiscent of classical design, it is not because someone copied blindly from the past. It is because mathematics is timeless, and mathematics survives even when societies fracture. The question deepens gradually. If fragments of older systems are resurfacing organically in laboratories and research centers, are we constructing something entirely new? Or are we unknowingly reassembling pieces of a framework once assembled before? The camera lingers on the rotating turbine, steady and efficient. Its motion feels modern, yet somewhere beneath its equations lies geometry older than memory. If echoes of the past resonate quietly in present innovation, an uncomfortable possibility emerges. What happens when rediscovered knowledge accelerates faster than our collective ability to understand its consequences? From the steady rhythm of ancient gears, the image shifts into humming data centers, where rows of servers glow in cold light. Scientists stand before particle accelerators spanning miles. Satellites drift above the planet, sending signals faster than thought. Screens flicker with algorithms that teach themselves, adapting at speeds once unimaginable. Humanity stands once again at a technological summit. Artificial intelligence processes languages and images in seconds. Energy systems grow more efficient with each iteration. Communication no longer respects distance. A message travels across oceans almost before it is spoken. The pace feels exponential. Yet beneath the brilliance lies a quieter question. Few individuals fully understand the systems they depend upon. The device in a pocket contains layers of knowledge distributed across continents. Microchip fabrication in one region, software architecture in another, satellite infrastructure orbiting overhead. Each layer requires specialists. Each specialist relies on other specialists. The system works. It is astonishingly effective, but it is intricately interdependent, and interdependence is strength and vulnerability at once. History offers a subtle lesson here. Many ancient collapses were not caused by the complete disappearance of knowledge. People did not suddenly forget how to farm or calculate. Instead, infrastructure fractured. Trade routes faltered. Political systems destabilized. Communication networks dissolved. When complexity grows beyond resilience, smaller shocks echo loudly. A drought in one region disrupts supply lines elsewhere. A leadership crisis weakens administrative coordination. A conflict interrupts apprenticeship chains. The knowledge itself may survive in fragments, but the system required to sustain it breaks apart. The twist feels uncomfortable because it forms a mirror. Our technologies grow more sophisticated every year, yet our collective memory feels thinner. Ask an average citizen how electricity travels from generator to home, and few can explain the journey. In earlier eras, artisans understood entire crafts end to end. Today, specialization narrows mastery into precise but isolated domains. Have we advanced, or have we simply become more dependent? Dependence is not weakness by default. Cooperation across disciplines allows extraordinary achievement. But when systems depend on uninterrupted stability, fragility increases silently. An ancient society, maintaining complex mechanical devices and astronomical tracking systems, likely required stable institutions and sustained educations. Once instability arrived, the most intricate knowledge suffered first. Simpler skills endured. Advanced systems dissolved. The possibility that advancement can outpace resilience settles gently into the mind. Or satellites and servers seem invincible, yet they require constant energy, maintenance, and coordination. Supply chains stretch globally. Data resides in cloud infrastructures few individuals can physically access. The glow of modern laboratories reflects immense capability, but capability does not guarantee continuity. Perhaps ancient societies recognize this tension. Perhaps their decisions to seal certain technologies beneath temples were influenced not only by fear of misuse, but awareness of fragility. If infrastructure wavers, complex tools become liabilities rather than assets. The image of buried mechanisms returns, reframed. What once appeared suppression may have been caution. What seemed retreat may have been strategic pause. If complexity can outpace sustainability, then rediscovery alone is not triumph. It must be paired with memory, understanding not only how something works, but how it is supported. The next reflection turns inward again, asking whether restraint itself might be wisdom. The glow of laboratories fades into softer light. The hum of machines quiets. The questions shift from capability to consequence. In recent decades, humanity has unlocked forces once imagined only in theory. Nuclear power can illuminate cities or erase them. Genetic engineering can cure disease or alter the fabric of life itself. Artificial intelligence learns patterns faster than any individual mind, generating insights and decisions whose implications ripple outward. Each breakthrough carries promise and unease. Debates emerge almost immediately, not about whether something can be done, but whether it should. Panels convene. Ethical guidelines are drafted. Regulations lag behind innovation. The pace of discovery often outruns collective agreement. This tension feels familiar. Ancient myths described fire stolen prematurely. Tools granted without preparation. Towers raised too high. The language framed events as divine warning, but perhaps beneath the symbolism lay recognition of imbalance. Technology expanding faster than moral readiness. Capability does not equal maturity. Across certain ancient cultures, advanced knowledge was not shared openly. Astronomical calculations were passed only to initiated scholars. Metallurgical techniques required years of apprenticeship. Sacred chambers were entered only after rigorous preparation. It is tempting to interpret such restrictions as power consolidation, and in some cases they likely were. But restriction can also arise from responsibility. If a tool amplifies influence or destruction, limiting access until character is formed becomes prudence rather than oppression. The reveal unfolds softly. In several traditions, moral discipline preceded technical instruction. Apprentices learned ethics alongside craft. Mastery was not merely mechanical, It was relational, understanding how knowledge fit within community stability. Perhaps burial of complex devices followed similar logic, not suppression to maintain ignorance, but restraint to prevent imbalance. If infrastructure faltered or leadership weakened, powerful tools might destabilize rather than support. Is wisdom measured by what we discover, or by what we choose not to use? The question moves gently through the mind. Modern parallels are striking. Nuclear technology is monitored through international agreements. Genetic experimentation undergoes review boards. Artificial intelligence research navigates emerging regulatory frameworks. Humanity recognizes that knowledge alone is insufficient. Context matters. Ancient societies may have reached similar conclusions within their own frameworks. They lacked modern vocabulary, but they understood consequence. Myths encoded caution. Apprenticeship systems delayed access. Vaults concealed mechanisms during instability. Restraint is rarely dramatic. It is quiet. It appears as hesitation, as ritual, as selective teaching. From a distance, it may resemble suppression. Up close, it can reveal care. None of this proves that ancient technologies rivaled modern ones in scope. But it reframes motive. Burial may have been less about control and more about timing. Humanity cycles through discovery and humility repeatedly. Advances spark optimism. Consequences demand reflection. Systems adjust. The rhythm feels ancient. The narrative now approaches more provocative territory. If fragments of devices, myths, and rediscovered principles hint at coordinated understanding, perhaps they were never isolated at all. Perhaps they belong to a unified framework, a system connecting energy, mathematics, and consciousness in ways only partially glimpsed today. The next chapter steps cautiously into that possibility. At sunrise, certain standing stones cast shadows that fall with perfect intention. The lines are not random. They trace paths across Earth in rhythm with the year. Beneath them, the ground hums faintly when wind moves through narrow channels, carved deep below the surface. Water flows through temple corridors, not merely for cleansing, but along gradients calculated with precision that feels deliberate. Individually, these details seem architectural, clever, symbolic, beautiful together. They suggest something more organized. Imagine walking into a subterranean chamber, shaped so carefully that a whisper at one end carries clearly to the other. Acoustic resonance bends gently through stone passages. A single tone seems to expand, filling the chamber as if amplified by invisible design. Engineers studying such spaces today note how curvature and volume determine vibration patterns. Ancient builders may not have written equations, yet they understood effect. Elsewhere, temples rise atop geothermal fault lines, where subtle magnetic anomalies register beneath foundations. Watercourses beneath sacred complexes follow intentional routes, creating pressure changes that produce measurable vibration. Stone blocks align not only with the sun, but with particular star cycles repeating across centuries. Each feature alone appears ceremonial. Together, they begin to resemble infrastructure. The theory unfolds cautiously, not as declaration, but as question. Could some ancient structures have been designed to interact with natural forces in structured ways? Resonance, magnetism, hydraulic motion, solar alignment. Individually, these are physical phenomena. In combination, they form systems. Consider water channeled beneath stone floors. As it flows, pressure builds and releases. Vibrations transmit upward. If chambers above are tuned to particular frequencies, subtle acoustic effects emerge. Add solar alignment through apertures that concentrate light at specific times of year, and the structure becomes more than shelter. It becomes instrument. Mapping projects in recent years have layered ancient sites across digital models. Unexpected parallels appear. Ratios between chamber dimensions in distant cultures align mathematically. Angles of orientation mirror solar paths with startling consistency. Sacred complexes, separated by oceans, share geometric proportions, once dismissed as aesthetic preference. Coincidence is possible. Convergent design is plausible. Different societies observing the same sky may arrive at similar solutions. Yet the repetition invites curiosity. What if temples were not only places of worship, but components of a forgotten machine? The word machine here expands beyond metal gears. It implies system, interacting parts aligned toward purpose. Architecture harnessing environmental forces not dramatically, but subtly. Stones positioned to amplify natural resonance. Water directed to stabilize vibration. Orientation, guiding seasonal awareness. Modern engineers design buildings to optimize airflow, light capture, and structural resonance. We call it sustainable architecture or wave engineering. The principles are physical, timeless. Ancient builders, working without contemporary terminology, may have encoded similar insights in sacred form. The scale shifts here from individual artifacts to integrated frameworks, not isolated devices buried in chambers, but entire landscapes, arranged intentionally. If energy interaction was embedded in architecture, then those structures carried more than ritual meaning. They may have functioned as stabilizers, calendars, observatories, perhaps even experimental laboratories of natural force. The possibility is expansive, yet restrained. It does not demand extraordinary claims. It asks whether a layer of practical understanding rests beneath sacred symbolism. Patterns across continents suggest shared observation of nature's rhythms. Whether by contact or parallel insight, alignment with solar and planetary motion remains consistent. The viewer feels the scope widening. If stone and water interacted with sun and vibration intentionally, then data astronomical, mathematical, had to be encoded somewhere within that design. The next step descends further, beyond structure into message, asking how information itself may have been written into stone and sky. Long before ink dried on parchment, the sky recorded cycles in light. Monuments across continents align with rising suns on solstices, with shadows cast precisely at equinox, with stars that crest specific horizons once each year. These alignments are often explained as ritual observance, and they are. Agriculture depended on seasons. Ceremony marked time. Watching the heavens ensured survival. But ritual does not exclude precision. Celestial bodies follow predictable paths across vast stretches of time. The return of certain constellations marks eras. The slow wobble of Earth's axis shifts star positions gradually, measurable across centuries. If one wished to preserve information beyond fragile manuscripts, the sky offered durable reference. Stone aligned with sunrise on a particular date becomes more than decoration. It becomes a clock anchored in orbit. A chamber designed to frame a constellation at a specific angle becomes a timestamp visible long after language evolves. If books burn and machines rust, what medium never forgets? The heavens move, but they move reliably. By encoding observation into architecture, ancient societies could create memory resilient to decay. Even if interpretation faded temporarily, future generations could rediscover alignment through patient measurement. The sky remains legible to those willing to observe. The deeper twist emerges quietly. Some monuments do not align perfectly with today's skies. They appear offset by degrees that correspond not to error, but to precession, the gradual shift of Earth's rotational axis over millennia. When back calculated, their orientations match celestial configurations from earlier epochs. This suggests foresight. Builders either understood long-term astronomical movement or constructed monuments, referencing past alignments intentionally. In either case, the scale of thought extends beyond a single lifetime. Architecture becomes archive. Across regions separated by ocean, similar strategies appear. Structures oriented towards solstitial light, layouts reflecting star patterns, mythologized in narrative, temples arranged so that particular constellations rise along central axes. Individually, each case can be explained through local necessity. Together, they hint at layered systems, mechanical devices mapping cycles on smaller scale, buildings resonating with natural forces, celestial alignment anchoring knowledge across generations. The framework expands. Astronomy was not separate from architecture, it was embedded within it. Mechanical calculation supported observation, myth encoded seasonal rhythm. Everything intertwined. The viewer begins to sense integration, not random artifacts scattered across history, but coordinated awareness expressed through multiple mediums. Yet, if such a unified system once existed, mechanisms tracking cycles, structures tuned to energy, monuments recording celestial time, why does it not function now? Why does it appear fragmented rather than seamless? Perhaps continuity broke, perhaps interpretation dissolved, perhaps the system depended on trained observers who vanished. With system-level thinking now visible, the final reflection of this chapter turns toward a more unsettling implication. If fragments suggest an integrated ancient framework, then what caused its disintegration? The answer may not lie in disappearance of knowledge alone, but in the collapse of cohesion itself. Systems rarely collapse with a single blow. A drought stretches harvests thin, trade falters, political alliances strain, a tremor reshapes coastline, migration follows necessity. War interrupts apprenticeship. One disruption alone might be absorbed. Imagine a knowledge framework not centralized in a single library, but dispersed across society, architecture aligned with the sun, mechanisms calculating cycles, rituals encoding seasonal data, apprentices trained in layered disciplines. Each element supports the others, removes stability, and connections weaken. A device still functions, but its operators disperse. A temple still stands, but its alignment is no longer measured carefully. A myth continues to be told, yet its technical meaning dissolves into allegory. Over time, coherence fades. If ancient knowledge was decentralized, yet interconnected, its collapse would not resemble explosion. It would resemble unraveling, threads drifting apart gradually until the fabric loses shape. Geological shifts submerge coastlines where key centers once stood. Climatic upheaval forces communities inland, breaking observational consistency. Skilled teachers die without passing methods to successors. Scripts evolve, altering interpretation of preserved texts. The framework dissolves, not because it was weak, but because it required cohesion. Devices without teachers become relics. Structures without instruction become monuments. Symbols without explanation become myth. The defining twist lies here. The collapse of such a system would not leave behind dramatic machine ruins towering above landscape. Complex apparatus, built from materials sensitive to environment, would corrode. Workshops would empty. Only the most durable pieces survive: stone, bronze, alignment carved into earth. What remains are fragments. A gear found beneath the sea. A resonant chamber beneath temple floor. A star-aligned corridor whose purpose is partially remembered. Each isolated element appears anomalous. Together, they may once have been components of something integrated. What if we are surrounded by pieces of a machine, but no longer possess its manual? The thought is unsettling precisely because it requires no extravagance. It does not demand hidden empires or secret conspiracies. It requires only recognition that systems depend on continuity, and continuity can fail. The camera returns once more to the artifact beneath museum glass. It no longer feels like an impossible object out of time. It feels like a surviving Part 1 gear from a larger assembly whose other parts have scattered across geography and narrative. Its silence changes meaning. It is not whispering conspiracy. It is embodying incompletion. Across continents, remnants align in subtle ways. Architecture echoes mathematics. Myth echoes mechanism. Energy interaction echoes observation. Each fragment alone is ambiguous. In combination, they suggest former integration. And yet, the system does not function now. Perhaps it cannot without shared understanding. Perhaps context is the missing component. Or perhaps its reassembly would require societal stability, capable of sustaining complexity responsibly. The gravity of collapse lingers without despair. Every civilization experiences rupture. The question is not whether collapse occurs, but how memory survives it. As the chapter closes, the focus shifts inward. If humanity once approached unified frameworks and lost cohesion through instability, where do we stand now? The next reflection turns to the present moment, asking whether we are approaching another threshold, capable of rebuilding forgotten integration, or drifting toward repetition of silence. The images return in quiet succession, submerged foundations resting beneath shifting water, sealed chambers open to air after centuries of silence, bronze gears turning in digital reconstruction, granite blocks fitted so precisely that light cannot pass between them, temple corridors aligned with the rising sun, patents filed by forgotten inventors, myths describing fire, flight, and consequence. Individually, each once felt like anomaly. Together, they begin to resemble pattern. The tone softens into something almost hushed. Humanity stands in an unusual moment of awareness. For most of history, discoveries were isolated by geography and time. A scholar in one region could not easily compare findings with another across oceans. Data traveled slowly, interpretation lagged behind excavation. Now the distance has narrowed. Satellite imaging reveals foundations beneath deserts and coastal shelves invisible to previous generations. High-resolution scans penetrate Earth without excavation. Artificial intelligence maps ratios and alignments across continents, detecting similarities that would have taken lifetimes to calculate manually. What once required centuries of accumulated observation can now emerge in months. Researchers overlay temple orientations against solar cycles and discover consistent angular relationships previously dismissed as artistic coincidence. Geologists map natural energy gradients beneath ancient sites and note their repeated proximity to specific geological features. Mathematicians trace proportional systems encoded in architecture and find echoes across cultures long considered separate. None of this proves a lost global empire. It reveals something subtler. Ancient structures display a recurring awareness of natural forces, solar movement, magnetism, resonance, hydraulic dynamics, embedded not randomly but with measured intent. When viewed in isolation, these elements appear cultural. When cross-referenced digitally across regions and eras, they form clusters. The suggestion grows gradually, without spectacle. Humanity may not be uncovering isolated inventions. It may be rediscovering fragments of an integrated worldview, one that understood nature's patterns deeply enough to embed them in physical form. Mechanical devices mapping celestial cycles. Architecture tuned to vibrations. Myths encoding seasonal memory. Apprenticeship systems preserving layered knowledge. Together, they hint at coherence. What happens when separate mysteries begin to speak the same language? The question carries weight without urgency. For the first time, digital tools allow synthesis rather than speculation. Patterns once dismissed due to limited data now resurface through aggregation. The connections are not dramatic or absolute, but they are persistent. A site in one hemisphere aligns with solstitial sunrise at a similar ratio as another thousands of miles away. A subterranean chamber produces acoustic resonance, consistent with others constructed in entirely different cultural contexts. Bronze mechanisms share proportional mathematics, with architectural modules carved in stone. Each observation alone is modest. In combination, they suggest intention layered across systems. The viewer senses cohesion forming at the edges of understanding, not certainty, but alignment. Perhaps ancient knowledge was never entirely lost. Perhaps it fragmented under pressure and survived in different mediums. Now, with modern tools capable of cross-referencing vast datasets, those fragments begin to reconnect. The artifact beneath museum glass no longer feels solitary. It feels contextual. The stone wall in a distant mountain seems less isolated. The myth of stolen fire carries new dimension. Rediscovery does not require grand revelation. It unfolds through careful integration. And if fragments are reconnecting, if patterns are emerging across time through technology that did not exist before, then a deeper question presses gently forward. Are we prepared for what rediscovery might unlock? The scene brightens with modern light. Fusion reactors pulse behind reinforced glass. Laboratories experiment with materials thinner than paper, yet stronger than steel. Quantum processors sit cooled near absolute zero, performing calculations that would have seemed mystical a generation ago. Satellites adjust orbital paths with delicate precision. Algorithms refine themselves faster than any team of engineers could guide them. Humanity is moving quickly again. The pace feels familiar. If previous cycles of advancement faltered not because knowledge was evil, but because it outpaced ethical grounding, then rediscovery alone cannot be celebration. Understanding must travel alongside responsibility. The fragments we are reconnecting, mathematical ratios, energy interactions, architectural resonance, remain harmless in isolation. A gear behind glass does not destabilize society. A star-aligned temple does not alter global systems, but integration transforms fragments into force. Here the reflection deepens. What if the absence of complete ancient blueprints was intentional, not an accident of erosion, but a structural safeguard? Devices buried without instructions, symbols preserved without translation keys, systems fractured in a way that required careful reconstruction rather than direct inheritance. Such fragmentation would slow progress deliberately. Instead of awakening fully formed machinery, future generations would have to rediscover principles step by step. Each rediscovery would demand observation, calculation, and collaborative verification. Maturity would develop alongside mastery. The thought is unsettling yet measured. Perhaps fragments survived precisely because they could not function alone. A resonant chamber without its coordinating framework is architectural curiosity. A bronze mechanism without teaching remains artifact. Sacred geometry without contextual application is aesthetic. Only when pieces converge does power emerge. Is it possible the past limited us to protect our future? The question is philosophical rather than accusatory. Ancient societies may have recognized that stability required pacing. If knowledge accelerates faster than culture can assimilate it, imbalance follows. Tools exceed wisdom. Modern debates echo this tension. Artificial intelligence evolves rapidly, prompting ethical scrutiny. Gene editing offers promise and risk. Energy breakthroughs promise abundance, yet require governance. Acceleration without reflection can destabilize. The possibility that fragmentation functioned as restraint reframes disappearance. Perhaps collapse was not only tragedy, but unintended safeguard. A unified system dissolving into pieces ensures that reconstruction demands time and collaboration rather than immediate dominance. This does not imply deliberate global coordination across civilizations. It suggests human recognition of vulnerability recurring through history. As modern facilities glow with innovation, the mirror sharpens. We are reconstructing fragments of mathematics, of energy interaction, of systemic thinking through advanced tools unavailable before. The risk is not in rediscovery itself. It lies in integration without grounding. If understanding ancient frameworks reveals deeper ways to interact with natural forces, the question becomes urgent. Are we prepared to assemble what we are beginning to recognize? The final reflection of this chapter turns inward. It examines readiness, not as intelligence or capacity, but as collective maturity, because rediscovery, without wisdom, repeats old patterns, and patterns, as history suggests, are patient. The pace slows again, almost to stillness. Throughout history, intelligence has never been the rare ingredient. Ancient civilizations displayed brilliance in architecture, astronomy, metallurgy, agriculture. Modern society demonstrates extraordinary computational and scientific capacity. And yet, brilliance alone has never secured permanence. Civilizations do not collapse because their people are incapable of thought. They falter when balance erodes, when trust dissolves, when complexity grows faster than cohesion, when hubris dulls caution. Readiness is not measured by invention. It is measured by integration. Can societies absorb disruptive technologies without turning them against themselves? Can power generated by new tools be distributed without destabilizing cooperation? Can innovation advance without leaving ethics trailing behind? These are not technical questions. They are relational ones. An advanced device may function flawlessly, yet still disrupt systems unprepared to handle its consequences. Knowledge centralized too quickly can fracture trust. Information amplified without context can polarize communities. Infrastructure extended beyond maintenance capacity can crumble under strain. In earlier chapters, the possibility emerged that ancient technologies may have been buried not purely from fear, but from restraint. If powerful frameworks required stable societies to operate safely, then their fragmentation may have reflected imbalance rather than ignorance. The documentary's central premise shifts here, almost gently. Perhaps forbidden ancient technology was never solely about advanced machines. Perhaps it was about alignment. Alignment between scientific insight and ethical maturity, between technical skill and communal stability, between innovation and humility. When that alignment breaks, systems fail. The artifact from the opening chapter appears again in quiet light. It once felt enormous evidence of lost supremacy or suppressed genius. Now it feels different, smaller, almost modest. A single gear in a larger assembly. It is no longer accusation. It is invitation. Its presence does not prove that humanity once ruled forces beyond imagination. It suggests that fragments of understanding surface and recede across time. Are we rediscovering tools or rediscovering ourselves? The question lingers because it touches something deeper than archaeology. If the true challenge of advanced knowledge lies not in construction, but in stewardship, then every era faces the same test. Can capability be paired with character? Can acceleration be moderated by reflection? Modern society stands at extraordinary capacity. Our tools reach beyond atmosphere and into subatomic realms. Yet trust remains fragile. Cooperation, ethical consensus shifts unevenly. Readiness is not about intelligence. It is about humility. It is about recognizing patterns before repeating them. The artifact under glass feels almost quiet now. It does not demand answers. It reflects a possibility. That knowledge comes in waves, and each wave requires maturity to sustain. The final chapter steps back from gears and chambers, from temples and laboratories, and asks a softer question. Was humanity ever truly kept in the dark? Or have we always held the light carefully, uncertain how brightly to let it shine? The final chapter begins without spectacle. Sunlight touches ancient stone with the same patience it has shown for centuries. Ruins stand quietly under morning sky, their shadows stretching long across open ground. Far away, modern cities glow at night, windows flickering like constellations turned inward. There is no crescendo here, no revelation framed as triumph. Only stillness. From the beginning, a question has hovered over everything. Were certain technologies buried to keep humanity in the dark? The phrase suggests intention, a hidden hand, a curtain drawn deliberately across history. But what if darkness is simpler than that? What if darkness is not concealment, but absence of context? A mechanical device, without its manual, appears miraculous. A temple aligned with the sun feels mystical when its astronomical function fades from memory. A myth preserved in poetic language sounds supernatural when its technical core erodes across generations. Without continuity, fragments feel mysterious. The artifact beneath museum glass once seemed almost defiant, evidence that something had been suppressed. But perhaps it was never hidden by design. Perhaps it endured by chance, while its surrounding framework dissolved through ordinary vulnerability. Fire, flood, war, migration, human error, political shifts. All of these reshape societies with quiet persistence. Libraries burn accidentally, as often as intentionally. Apprentices drift towards survival over specialization. Infrastructure weakens under strain long before collapse is visible. The temptation to imagine deliberate suppression may reflect something deeper, or discomfort with fragility. It is easier to blame secrecy than to accept how easily complexity can fracture. If knowledge once reached heights that later generations struggled to interpret, perhaps it was not stolen, perhaps it was interrupted. What if there was no curtain, only silence misunderstood? The thought does not erase mystery. It reframes it. Darkness can simply mean that light was not carried forward effectively. Continuity matters as much as invention. Without teachers, tools lose meaning. Without language, diagrams become decoration. Without stable institutions, advanced frameworks unravel gradually. Human history is filled with examples of rediscovery. Techniques thought lost resurface. Mathematical insights are independently derived in different cultures. Engineering solutions emerge where need and curiosity intersect. Loss does not end possibility. The idea that humanity was deliberately kept ignorant assumes centralized control across centuries and continents. Such coordination would require a unity no historical evidence supports. Fragmentation, however, is easy. The collapse of trade routes isolates knowledge. Climate stress redirects attention from refinement to survival. Shifting power structures prioritize stability over experimentation. In this environment, complexity thins quietly. Mystery does not require conspiracy. It requires interruption. The ruins under sunrise no longer feel like monuments to suppression. They feel like remnants of cycles, moments of brilliance sustained for a time, then scattered. Modern city lights do not signal immunity from that cycle. They signal participation within it. The darkness that once seemed deliberate now appears contextual. Without shared understanding, fragments appear magical. Without cumulative continuity, progress appears uneven. Mystery softens into humility. The artifact remains under glass. The temple remains under sky. The stories remain in memory. Nothing was erased completely. Everything was simply fragmented. And with darkness reframed as absence rather than concealment, attention turns gently toward continuity. If knowledge can disappear quietly through vulnerability, how does it survive at all? The final reflection shifts from what was lost to what endures. History is not a staircase. It is a tide. It advances quietly, gathering insight, building systems, refining tools. Then it recedes, pulling complexity back toward simplicity. And after the water withdraws, it returns again. Sometimes differently shaped, sometimes stronger, but unmistakably familiar. Fire was discovered more than once. Agriculture appeared independently in distant valleys separated by oceans. Mathematics surfaced in separate civilizations, each arriving at similar conclusions through careful observation. The instinct to measure the world seems to emerge wherever curiosity takes root. Knowledge, it does not vanish entirely. It contracts. When complex systems collapse, what survives are fragments, stories told around fires, proportions preserved in stone, rhythms remembered through ritual. These remnants appear small, but they carry seeds. A myth may encode astronomical memory, even after its scientific origin fades. A temple's alignment may preserve a ratio long after the formula is forgotten. A device found centuries later may reveal patterns rediscovered independently by new generations. Curiosity persists. The underlying capacity to observe, calculate, and experiment resides not in artifacts, but in human thought itself. Even when documentation fails, the impulse to look at the sky and ask why remains intact. Even when blueprints burned, hands still shape stone carefully, and minds still seek patterns. Can knowledge truly disappear? If the mind that created it still exists, the question carries quiet reassurance. Perhaps complete ancient manuals are unnecessary. Perhaps rediscovery is not accident, but inevitability. When humans face similar environments and similar questions, solutions often converge. Alignment with the sun improves agriculture, whether inscribed in myth or plotted through software. Harmonic proportions stabilize structures, whether derived from sacred geometry or engineering textbooks. Mechanical calculation emerges wherever cycles demand prediction. The persistence lies not in preservation alone, but in recurrence. This perspective transforms the narrative. Instead of imagining a lost golden age irretrievably superior to the present, we begin to see cycles of refinement and forgetting. Not linear ascent, but oscillation. Resilience becomes the quiet hero of the story. Civilizations falter. Infrastructure fails. Manuscripts crumble. Yet the instinct to rebuild remains stubborn. Each generation inherits fragments, tools, symbols, partial understandings, and assembles new frameworks from them. The artifact beneath museum glass may not represent forbidden supremacy. It may represent continuity interrupted, then resumed elsewhere. The stone walls carved with mathematical care may reflect principles that modern engineers rediscover independently. Nothing mystical, nothing conspiratorial, only human persistence. The quiet optimism emerging here does not dismiss fragility. It acknowledges it. Systems can fail. Context can erode. But curiosity resurfaces. Patterns reappear. Intelligence adapts. Perhaps humanity does not need complete, ancient blueprints, because the deeper blueprint is internal. The instinct to align with celestial cycles. The drive to calculate motion. The desire to harness energy responsibly. Foes' impulses do not fade. They wait. And now only one final reflection remains. One last return to the beginning, where the artifact first rested in quiet light. No longer as an anomaly, but as part of a rhythm that continues. The film returns to the beginning. A single mechanism rests beneath museum glass, lit by soft, patient light. Visitors move past it in measured silence. Some pause, some glance and continue walking. The device remains still, its interlocking forms frozen mid-purpose. When we first saw it, it felt impossible, a relic too advanced for its age, a suggestion that something had been hidden, suppressed, erased. It carried tension. Now it carries context. It is no longer accusation. It is continuity. This mechanism survived, not because someone intended to deceive the future. It endured because survival is uneven. Bronze resists decay longer than parchment. Stone outlasts memory. Objects sometimes escape the storms that dismantle the systems around them. Civilizations shift. Institutions rise and fall. Knowledge fractures and reforms. Yet occasionally, a fragment persists long enough to be rediscovered. The artifact does not whisper secrets of grand conspiracy. It reflects something quieter. Interruption followed by return. The minds that shaped it once observed the sky with care, translated motion into ratio, and built complexity from pattern. Those minds are gone. The curiosity that animated them is not. Throughout this journey, the question lingered, were ancient technologies buried to keep humanity in the dark? Perhaps. But darkness may not require deliberate concealment. It may arise when context disappears, when teachers vanish, when apprentices turn toward survival instead of refinement, when infrastructure dissolves quietly across generations. Or perhaps burial itself was never solely suppression. Perhaps light must be earned repeatedly, generation by generation. A system too intricate to sustain, during instability, cannot survive fully intact. It must fragment and wait. The mechanism beneath glass becomes smaller. As the camera slowly pulls back, the room expands. The silence deepens. Its presence feels less like mystery and more like reminder. Human knowledge is tidal. It advances, recedes and returns in altered form. Fragments inspire reconstruction. Stories encode hints. Patterns resurface in new language. Nothing suggests that humanity was permanently kept from understanding. Nothing proves that hidden architects orchestrated ignorance across millennia. What remains undeniable is fragility. Complex systems demand balance. Innovation demands maturity. Continuity demands care. And forgetfulness is easy. What if the real forbidden technology is forgetting? Not forgetting specific devices, but forgetting alignment between capability and responsibility, between invention and humility. When memory fractures, fragments seem magical. When context fades, continuity appears impossible. Yet the artifact survived. Not as a final answer. As a question, are we rediscovering lost systems? Or repeating cycles of insight and interruption? Are we chasing hidden brilliance, or learning that brilliance alone is insufficient? The mechanism remains still, its gears unmoving behind glass. But in another sense, it continues to turn, quietly, symbolically, through the minds of those who look at it and ask why. The camera withdraws further. The museum recedes into shadow. The artifact becomes a small point of reflected light in a vast room. There is no dramatic conclusion, no revelation carved in stone, only perspective. The story does not end here. It extends wherever curiosity leads next, into laboratories, into ruins, into classrooms, into minds willing to observe patiently. Light is not something granted once and preserved forever. It must be tended, and perhaps that has always been the point.